Hello, I would like to thank everyone who is taking the time to grade these capstone thesis presentations. My name is Trenton Sokol, and I did my capstone thesis on music and social movement in the United States. So on the left, you can see a depiction of the hippie protest movement with the iconic sign, "Make Love, Not War." And in this image, you can see the demographic is primarily young people, not exclusively, but many people did not agree politically with the Vietnam War and took action against the government policies that were being put in place, such as the draft. On the right, um, a sign which I believe is very profound. It says, "No war. How can we teach our children that violence will not solve their problems when our government always turns to violence to solve its problems?" I believe that's a very profound question, and the US government has never really reconciled this question. So, to introduce my topic, I would first like to begin by directing your attention to the images on the right. These are iconic figures who led the way for uh, music that impacted the political consciousness in the United States. Bob Dylan with his rebellious um, challenge to the status quo, and John Lennon with his call to imagine a more peaceful and better world, and Bob Marley with his profound messages of unity, love, and of course, one love to the universe. So, music has played an important role in successful social movements in the United States and played a key role in shifting cultural attitudes towards discrimination and war. Um, I've seen other um, scholars as well as musicians use the term message music, and I like this definition. In my view, it defines songs that build solidarity and a common identity for listeners, and it challenges social norms, the status quo, and songs that advocate for peace and social change. Many of these songs inspire hope and call for loving one another. So, the potential for message music is very profound. Carlos Santana, a Grammy Award winning musician and iconic political activist, once said when speaking about how to create peace and positive social change and spreading his message, he said, "People are like flowers, music is like water, and I am the hose." The way I interpret that is ideas, cultural values, ideology, and beliefs flow through musicians into listeners, and if social movements can proactively tap into that stream, then they can more effectively enact positive social change. So I would like to acknowledge the risk that advocating peace can bring. Many of the most influential and successful peace promoters of all time and social change advocates meet a fate of premature death. Some key figures are outright assassinated. Um, Comes to mind figures such as Abraham Lincoln, um, perhaps less impactful John Lennon, and uh, Martin Luther King Jr., who led the civil rights movement and one of the most impactful figures to social movements of all time. Um, all met the fate of assassination, but the stress, notoriety, and drug use of message music musicians often leads to their premature death as well, and many speculate to the legitimacy of these deaths as record companies have a incentive of um, promoting artists down a uh, bad lifestyle that ends in premature death to capitalize on their um, rights to records, but um, there are many disputes around the deaths of these key figures. However, the reward of succeeding in message music is massive. Not only can an individual promote socio-cultural change, but also individuals who make a high impact and live on to tell their stories and teach the world new lessons receive prestigious recognition. For example, Bob Dylan received the Nobel Prize in Literature, and many other profound artists receive recognition from um, academies uh, and um, they're recognized by um, I'm gonna have to edit that somehow. Um, but who are recognized as international peace bringers and who are also recognized as um, award-winning musicians as well as political thinkers. So I'd like to honor those who have died in the service of peace: Marvin Gaye, Sam Cooke, Jim Morrison, John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, and Martin Luther King Jr. all led, all unfortunately met a destiny of premature death due to their service of social activism, and it is important to honor their life and influence to social movements. So, my thesis question: why are certain artists able to make such extraordinary social change through their songs and their music? The answer to this question will help social movements more proactively use music and songs as a tool to enact social change. Awareness plus actions equals social change, and music that's spread through a mass audience is essential in creating um, awareness, and this awareness often leads to people seeing the wrong in their community and taking action against it. The methodology for my study: I did an explorative study contrasting key individuals. My paper focuses on the artists who have been well documented, researched, and are known in academic literature as having a significant impact to social change. I used selective sampling, not only picking artists who have been recognized as harbingers of social change, but I selected a diverse pool of artists to understand the commonality in artists with various backgrounds. Secondary source: I primarily would distill secondary uh, sources, biographical sources, and autobiographical sources, as well as viewing uh, videos of live concerts and interviews from the artists themselves. So I used a comparative method, specifically contrasting lyrics, upbringing, sociocultural status, road to success, musical genre, messaging, and social impact. Um, the lyrical style of message music takes root in folk music tradition, and this has been shown by the research. And my research used a methodology from cultural anthropology, specifically folkloristics, called the functional method, which in this case is used to analyze the function of songs on the folk population and culture and how it shifts the values of the collective in the United States. So, um, specific cases I selectively sampled diverse artists. I did, however, aim for a time period spanning from roughly 1920s to the end of the 1970s. There's so much information and um, there's a lot of information and areas to explore in this realm, and I believed I could make the most um, contribution if I could limit the scope to this specific time period of history. This study specifically is looking at using music as a tool to enact social change in the USA. I specifically uh, studied the cases of Woody Guthrie, Bob Dylan, Sam Cooke, the Beatles, specifically John Lennon, had a impact that um, is known more in the United States. However, the Beatles as a whole did promote. Um, they did challenge the status quo in many ways. Carlos Santana, Marvin Gaye, Bob Marley, and the Wailers. For my literature and theory, um, I like to emphasize that message music realizes a paradigm shift with the invention of records and radio. Message music existed before the 1920s, of course, but the way it was received was very different, and that's why I began with this time period. Popular nomadic folk musicians like Woody Guthrie were the first kind of niche subculture to successfully break into popular culture. There's consensus consensus in literature that Woody Guthrie forged the path for popularizing music with impactful messages and controversial countercultural ideas. Woody Guthrie. So the important historical context to understand for Woody Guthrie is that he lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and the early stages of the Cold War. And he saw the damages of rampant poverty. His family, he was born into a relatively a family of relative means in a farming community in Oklahoma, relative to the other farmers. But when the Great Depression hit, all of his father's assets were unfortunately lost, and his father died in a fire on on one of his farms, and many speculate that may have been an intentional suicide. This led to Woody Guthrie's mom having to be placed into an insane asylum, and she later died of Huntington's disease, which Woody Guthrie also passed away of, which is very sad and unfortunate. Um, but Woody Guthrie being an orphan and being homeless led to his unique nomadic lifestyle and led to him being able to spread his music without being on mainstream radio. Eventually, he was able to sign a contract with Folk Records, and that's an interesting story, but um, that could be for another time. So, political battles. Um, Woody Guthrie spoke out against the Jim Crow South, inequality, and poverty. He also advocated for immigrants who were unfortunately looked down on and belittled on the Oklahoma mainstream radio at the time. Woody Guthrie is famous for promoting a communist or communal ideology. That depends on who you're asking. He advocates for inclusion, a rebellious attitude, and place a high value on natural beauty. Many of his hit songs discuss the beauty and romanticize the nature in Oklahoma where he grew up. So the major success of Woody Guthrie. Guthrie's he most effectively challenged popular narratives in the status quo by critiquing popular narratives and the tropes heard on mainstream radio. Um, his hit records that generated the most influence are This Land Is Your Land, Plane Crash in Los Gatos, and This Machine Kills Fascists. This Land Is Your Land is his most influential song, and even critics of Woody Guthrie cannot downplay the impact of this record. It was played by Bruce Springsteen at Obama's inauguration ceremony, and it is very well recognized. There is even some level of movement for it to be the national anthem, but I don't see that happening in the near future, but that is a position some people hold. This Land Is Your Land was a critique of God Bless America, which Woody Guthrie believed was too idealistic and in a way too braggadocious. And he believed it was, Woody Guthrie was a humble man. He saw the world in a different way. This folk music movement coincided with literature movements like the Beat poets, such as Ken Kesey, and also coincided with the novel Catcher in the Rye. Ordinary folk had gone through a massive loss of innocence during Guthrie's life, and many Americans were struggling with the dichotomy of idealism and actualism. Mainstream outlets painted the U.S. as an idealistic heaven, where many people were aware parts of America were actually looking like hell. Woody Guthrie set the stage for popular folk musician Bob Dylan. Uh, the historical context to understand for Bob Dylan is that he was a product of the baby boomer generation. Um, while he was slightly on the early wave, he benefited from um, the mass size of youth culture growing in America. And he was a key leader in the civil rights movement as well, having many, quote, protest anthems at the time. He had a very similar style to Woody Guthrie and promoted similar messages such as ending segregation. Bob Dylan, his true name is Alan Zimmerman, and he faced discrimination himself as a Jewish American. He promoted authentic, untold stories which illustrate the horrors of racism that ordinary people experience every day, and people seem to turn a blind eye to it. The success of Bob Dylan, he made a name for himself during the civil rights movement by illustrating what was wrong in America and advocating for change. He first found success in a song about Emmett Till, but later grew into a household name with records like Blowin' in the Wind, which is considered today to be a protest anthem. Excuse me. Bob Dylan continues to influence social change and was recently the recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Dylan recently performed for Bernie Sanders and performs for many other humanitarian fundraisers, and has existed as a controversial figure for generations and continues to be a controversial figure in the popular narrative. Dylan influences the hearts and minds of ordinary folk and elite artists with his stories, which builds awareness and inspire action. One person who Bob Dylan famously inspired is Sam Cooke. So the historical context to understand here is that Sam Cooke was living in the South during the pre-civil rights era. He faced, of course, adversity, horrific times, many of the experiences Sam Cooke had shaped who he was and spoke to the emotion in his songs and his lyrics. Um, he came to his musical prowess through the gospel music movement, and he was very successful as a singer through uh, religious mediums before pop radio. He really tried to be an apolitical figure, but he failed to escape con- uh, excuse me, controversy as a popular Black artist. Eventually, he used his platform of popular soul and R&B to speak out against discrimination and advocate for hope and change. Uh, Bob Dylan set the stage for popular artists to realize their influential role in society. Sam Cooke famously said he was ashamed and guilty that he did not advocate for social change earlier and speak out against discrimination. Um, However, as he did amass such a popular following, he was able to make a massive impact when he did decide to release a powerful message record. So, the success of Guthrie and Dylan both are popular folk artists, and some would argue their value is more so derived from their lyrics and stories than their singing prowess. However, Sam Cooke built his career on nonpartisan pop records, which are extremely good in my opinion. I enjoy listening to his records much more than Woody Guthrie's or Bob Dylan's, if I'm being honest. Dylan showed the world, and specifically Cooke, that it pays to take a chance on message music, and it can actually build peace and favor with fans who are the people who build up America, who vote in elections, and who are ultimately the harbingers of change themselves. So, Cooke was already a pop sensation, as I mentioned, and Blowin' in the Wind by Bob Dylan was the song that influenced so many people and continues to be um, a gateway into the world of political activism in a sense. Um, Cooke's hit record for political social change and an anthem, considered an anthem as well, is "A Change Is Gonna Come." And I would really recommend, if you have a moment, to stop and pause and to listen to "This Land Is Your Land." Uh, if you've already heard it, it is a very good song. Um, to listen to "Blowing in the Wind" and "A Change Is Gonna Come." It speaks to the heart, and I believe it gives a greater context than words or a study can understand. Bob Dylan famously said, remember, a Nobel Prize winner, he said, um, it's important not just to sit and analyze the 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 music on a page and what it means, but to listen to the songs and experience um, the music. So, um, following the success of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement took um, kind of took the spotlight major um, of the major protest culture. Carlos Santana was one of the key figures who came to prominence at this time. I was discussing my thesis with my stepfather, and he told me about his experience of seeing Carlos Santana at a protest concert and how that was very impactful for his life and the decisions that has led, and that it shaped his youth. And I believe that Carlos Santana is a very impactful figure. So the context, um, Carlos Santana is also a product of the baby boomer generation. Um, he is an immigrant himself, and he faced a lot of adversity. He didn't realize when he was coming to America the level of adversity he would be facing, and he said it took him a while to realize how much racism and discrimination there is in the United States. Um, he is also a leader of the Chicano rights movement and the anti-war uh, movement, and he is also in the psychedelic rock music. He advocates for the use of psychedelic drugs, and he himself partakes in the use of it. So um, his key political battles, Woodstock, uh, again, really his claim to fame was in the anti-war movement, uh, in the labor rights uh, protests for immigrants specifically, and drug rights. Uh, his key message is that he promotes love, peace, compassion, understanding, some level of civil disobedience, and just having a good time, protesting, and unconventional philosophies. Carlos Santana is a very interesting man, and if you have the time to read his uh, autobiography, um, it's very excellent. But the success of Carlos Santana is that he performed at many political demonstrations and is famous for accomplishing spreading messages of peace and love, denouncing war and fear. Um, Carlos believes that you have a choice to choose love or fear, and that giving people a chance to free themselves from fear and embrace love is the key to creating social change. I believe that's a very profound message. Santana was a hit during the 1970s and late 1960s, and he continues his music journey today. Pop narrative paints that he had a massive comeback as he produced an album with pop stars as well as artists who promote positive social change, which um, is very interesting how he is able to stay relevant through all these years. Santana is important to music and social change because he is one of the only prominent Latinx artists to break into the mainstream culture and promote a politically driven message. This is extremely impressive as he started life as a underprivileged immigrant and was able to break into culture with controversial, politically charged messages. Based on what we've learned thus far, it seems that Santana, this would be impossible for him as it led to so much resistance for so many others. Um, and he details how he was able to conquer this. He believes it's important to turn adversity into learning opportunities, understanding, and love. And he emphasizes compassion immensely. It's throughout his interviews, his writings, and his songs. Compassion, he believes, is the key to initiating social change. Um, his early career, he had a miraculous uh, rise to stardom when he played for Woodstock Music Festival, uh, and he famously was very under the influence of hallucinogenic drugs and was somehow able to pull off a legendary performance that impressed the likes of Jimi Hendrix as well as many other key leaders in the psychedelic rock movement. So the results of my research is that message artists almost always face adversity, discrimination, and disenfranchisement from the status quo, um, either early on in their life or throughout their life, usually begins in the earliest stages of their life and continues into their career. Artists that successfully capture the undertold stories that most people can relate to and empathize with are able to create the most social impact because listeners feel connected to the artist's commentary, which puts people in a state of receptiveness when the message for change does come. Like I said, this can be used for political, positive political social change, such as advocating peace, but this could also be used potentially to promote social change, which might not be considered positive. So it is important to understand that this is not a positive or negative tool. It just depends how it's used, and social movements could benefit from using this tool. Message music continues to be controversial and faces resistance from the mainstream. When Bob Dylan received his Nobel Prize, many in the mainstream looked down on his work and did not believe that he was fit to receive the award, and thought that it was a strange. It was like he was not in the club of being a recognized award winner. It was a very strange narrative that was being framed by many media outlets at the time. Um, there are two clear types of message artists. One, like Guthrie and Dylan, who grow their careers as message artists from the start. That's how they begin, and that's how they grow to fame and popularity. However, there's artists um, like Cooke and Marvin Gaye, who they raised to fame with fairly apolitical songs. Perhaps they challenge the status quo in other ways, promoting sexual behavior or other things of the sort, but typically not challenging um, the political status quo in a significant way. However, through either inspiration or a change in circumstance, these artists make a leap into message music. And when this music hits, it's major inflection points for movements because it changes the hearts and minds on a mass level and creates a new realm of understanding and a new paradigm of compassion. Both approaches can incite massive social change and spread messages of political activism. And I believe that it's necessary for both types of um, message artists to exist, as they feed off of each other, and their existence is only possible from legitimizing each other. Both approaches are important because um, the types who follow the Guthrie model generate buzz, awareness, and conversation amongst ordinary people. And artists like Cooke can capitalize on that buzz by affirming the grassroots movement and adding their own commentary, which reaches pop culture. Ultimately, the artists behind the songs all recognize that America is not serving the needs of people equally. Message artists give a voice to those who are systematically oppressed. All the artists advocate for peace and change, which can be a career-damaging decision. But what keeps these artists from getting blocked is a combination of grassroots pressure and an ability to tap into the hearts and minds of powerful gatekeepers. Santana tells the story of playing at an anti-war protest, and he says even the police took their hats off and started dancing. As everyone was just vibing, everyone was feeling the music, and no one felt like there was any fear or hatred being spread. It was a very loving atmosphere that was not chaotic and was not challenging social order in any way, shape, or form. Music is powerful in unifying people in a profound way. Carlos Santana has further commentary on protest and social change. Carlos Santana has been recognized by the UCLA um, academics um, uh, for various contributions to Chicano studies as well as other um, important studies of political change. Carlos emphasizes that the biggest strength of using live music for social change is that if you put a banner with a certain message up that may be controversial or challenging the status quo and play a certain type of music, you can create an environment where everyone is technically protesting and simultaneously, as I mentioned before, the police and gatekeepers of social order can take their hats off and enjoy, and because they're human beings as well, and if they enjoy the atmosphere and can realize the power of social change, then they too will be moved to become one with the movement. Music brings a crucial element of fun and coolness as well, and in many cases, universal understanding, which can influence the people who enforce order. The key to successful protests, according to Santana, is to touch people's hearts instead of instigating more violent fear. Music in a protest is powerful because it disarms violent actors and sets an uplifting tone of love, which leads to an atmosphere of peace and unity. Santana has specific wisdom that he would like to share with social movements. He believes that lessons from Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama to be key to promoting peace. Santana advocates that the key to promoting peace is compassion for all people. Lastly, Santana calls for an upgrade or change to the key American institutions that have shaped the United States into becoming the entity it has today, such as the Constitution, the Bible, and the national anthem. He states that institutions have led to conflict in the United States, and until these change, will continue to cause people to live in the illusion of doubt and fear, which leads to conflict and crisis, and also allows political leaders to control people who are in a state of controllability. Santana, like John Lennon, believes that the nation state is inherently a block on positive virtues and has led to division and separation. In the mind of these artists, nation states are not compatible with peace. I thought it was very interesting, their commentary on international relations and how the current operation and status quo of the international realm is in a sense driven by conflict and shaped by conflict, and if that continues, then a world with total peace is seemingly impossible. So to conclude, message music is powerful and effective. In times of heightened partisan conflict, music may be what the United States needs to de-escalate tension. I would like to give a nod to the rap movement in the United States. The African American community was disproportionately targeted by policies such as the war on drugs, and there is a lot of commentary within the political music realm on this, but this was outside the scope of my research. But artists such as Kendrick Lamar followed a similar model to Sam Cooke and Marvin Gaye, first drawing fame and influence through mainstream approved means, and then switching over to a message platform. So there are artists who are continuing this path, but I feel like the movement is dwindling out in the contemporary era, which is strange to me because we are currently living in a time where music is much more accessible and much more promotable than it ever was before through the internet and social media. And I believe that this could be a changing paradigm in the future for political movements to use music to advocate for peace. I personally believe that the movement currently growing with the most potential to make a splash in pop music with some hit message songs and create large scale change is the electronic music culture. It is known that their core beliefs and values are called PLUR, and that stands for peace, love, unity, and respect. And I believe if this movement is capitalized on and an artist could create strong, relatable narratives that challenge the status quo and promote a more peaceful and unifying message, that could be an effective tool for political movements who are seeking to gain um, power and favor with the citizenry. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for your time.